I saw this fun idea online from the Past Forward shop in their recycled paper collection, and I thought it would be fun to try to make one. You can follow along and make your own with me, or jump over to their website and buy one ready-made if you'd rather. I'll drop a link to their shop in the description of this video. If you want to make your own, you can do it for practically no cost, and you can use up some of those old magazines that are probably just collecting dust somewhere. And best of all, you can design any word that you want. To make this project, you're going to need several old magazines. You're also going to want some clear tape, and it's going to be very helpful if you have a holder like this so you can just tear the tape off with one hand. It just makes the project go quite a bit faster. You're going to want a pencil to write with, a wooden skewer, and some parchment paper. You also need an oversized sheet of paper. If you need to tape paper together, you can, but you just need a piece of paper that's large enough to fit your design on. You need a small circle template, a nice long clear ruler to help you draw a grid. It's also going to be very helpful if you have an L or T square, just to make sure that you're keeping everything square. You need some Mod Podge or some other PVA type of glue, a few permanent glue dots. You're also going to need some crochet thread or cording, and you're going to want either two large needles that are heavy enough to thread your cord through, or I'm going to be substituting some metal tape. You just need the end of your cording to be stiff enough to be able to thread through the magazine coils. You need a small paintbrush that's dedicated to use with your glue, some scissors, and a paper trimmer. So the first step is to roll a few starter coils to see what size they're going to be, and you can use your circle template to measure the coils once they're rolled. You can make the coils any size you want to, but I just wanted to use full sheets of my magazine paper. So for the large coil, I'm just going to tear off one sheet of paper and then just fold it into eighths. So I'm folding from top to bottom. And then I'm just going to fold it to the center, and one more time to the center. So I'm left with a piece. When this is folded, I have a strip of paper that's about 1 1/4 inches wide, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's about 1 3/8 inches actually. So before I roll this, the paper has a tendency to kind of bunch up, and you want to kind of keep everything as smooth as possible. It is going to kind of crumple a little bit, but I like to put a piece of tape at the top and one sort of in the middle. And then you can just start to roll the paper. You want it to be in sort of a tight roll. So I'm just coiling the end here. And you can see that it's already kind of crinkling. You want to go ahead and just make that, sort of crush the paper so that you can keep the ends as even as possible. And if you need to start over, you can rewind things. But you can see that the paper wants to kind of separate a little bit. So that's why you want to keep these ends taped so that they stay as even as possible. And you can kind of crunch the paper and crinkle it more evenly that way, so that you end up with a coil that's a little more uniform. Trying to keep my fold kind of at the top here so that it doesn't twist too much, but you can see that you are really kind of smashing the paper a little bit. And then when I get to the end, I'm just going to take another piece of tape. And I got that one a little bit long, so let me trim it off. You don't really want the tape coming around the ends of your coils. And then if you need to, you can kind of make them a little bit more rounded by rolling them in your hands, and then just making sure that your ends are fairly even. So once you have your coil, you can go ahead and measure the coil, and this one is kind of right between the 5/8 and the 11/16. since I have some different sizes of paper and I've rolled quite a few of these coils, I know that some of them do end up a little bit bigger than this one. So when I draw my template, I'm probably going to use this larger circle. To make the smaller coils, I'm going to use my paper trimmer. And I like to trim about 3 sheets of paper at one time. So I'm going to tear off 3 sheets of paper. And then I just want to cut strips that are 1 3/8 inch. You can obviously cut these pieces by hand if you don't have a trimmer, but it certainly takes quite a bit longer. So if you do have a paper trimmer, it goes much faster. And you do need quite a few of these coils. So the faster you can get them cut, the better. And the paper cutter is just good for getting a more uniform cut. So once you have several paper strips cut, you can go ahead and start to roll them. And this is where you need the wooden skewer or dowel. And you can just roll the paper around the dowel. You don't want to roll it too tightly because you want the dowel to slide out easily. And then you can smooth out your coil. And again, just add a little piece of tape to hold the coil. So you need a lot of these coils, and I did a lot of it in front of the TV, to be honest. But you can either continue rolling or jump to the design phase so you can actually draw out your template and determine roughly how many coils you're going to need. So that's what I'm going to do next. So the first thing that you want to do is obviously you're going to need to decide what word you want to draw out. And for this example, I'm making some Christmas decor, so I'm going to write out the word joy. And I've already gone ahead and drawn a grid on my paper. For some reason I drew 2.5 by 3, but I used those measurements for the other templates that I made. So I'm just continuing with that spacing. And I want to go ahead and draw each letter one at a time. The things you want to think about when you're doing this are whether you want all of your letters to be exactly uniform, and by that I mean the same size. For my original template, you can see here that I adjusted some of the lettering because you want to think about how the letters are going to connect to each other, and then also just how they're going to look when they're combined together. So I decided on this to make the O a little bit smaller, just to make it a little more visually interesting and to make the V go up a little higher. So you do want to kind of design the font and think about how you want the letters to fit together as you're drawing your word. So you may want to draw a few test examples just to see how your letters are going to fit together. So what I think I'm going to do with this lettering is I'm going to make a fairly big J, a smaller O, and a sort of mid-sized Y. And because the O and the J, I'm going to have to think about how the O and the J are going to connect together. So I want to just sketch out the sort of inside line of my J. And I don't want this to be too huge. So I'm just going to draw my uppercase J. And I just know from my other templates that the height that I've used is about the 3.5 spaces on my grid. So I'm going to trace out my J, and then I want to take my circle template once I'm happy with the J, and I'm going to use my 11/16 inch circle to draw my design. And I've chosen to make my letters sort of double coils wide because I just think that's sort of visually the most appealing. But you can certainly, if you're making smaller coils, you could do even thicker letters, or you could try making larger coils and just do one coil to make the letters. You can certainly experiment. This is just kind of the system that I designed to use 2 circles wide to make the letters. So when you're drawing this template out, you don't need to be perfectly precise with how you are fitting the circles together, but you do want to kind of make them touch so that you're going to get an idea of how many coils you're going to need and what they're going to look like when they're laid out. So I'm just drawing a circle that's touching the center line that I drew my letter with, and sort of making sure that the coils or the circles are touching each other as well. So don't take a ton of time trying to line everything up with this ruler. You're just trying to get sort of an idea of what it's going to look like and how the coils are going to fit together. Because when you're working with straight lines, the coils, you can obviously just go pair them up and let them be opposite each other. But when you start to get into curves and other, corners and things, you have to sort of figure out how many coils are going to fit in a given space. So aesthetically, I have to think about whether I want to make the J a little bit bigger. I don't know. I don't want it too big. I think what I might do is when I'm laying this out, I'm going to tighten up this curve a little bit so that this comes in, but I'm not going to worry about redrawing it now. And when I'm laying it out, I may decide to add a couple more coils to the top, but I'm just going to leave it sketched the way it is for right now. And I think as I'm sketching this that I'm going to tilt my O a little bit, and that I don't know exactly how my Y is going to fit in here, but I'm going to sort of sketch in an O that is leaning this way. And that's purely an aesthetic choice. But I need to think about where it's going to connect to the J. So I'm going to draw a couple of circles here to start the O. Sort of thinking that it might connect with these first 3. So now I can go ahead and sort of draw in my O. And again, don't worry too much about making this perfect, because you are going to end up kind of shifting things around a little bit once you start laying the coils in to make the design. That might be tilted a little bit much, but it's hard to say when you don't have all of the coils drawn on here. Now, the thing that I need to make sure I'm doing is keeping the bottom of my letters square. So I'm going to go ahead and draw another squared off line, and probably I want at least 2 circles on the J to be on this squared off line. So again, I'm probably going to end up flattening off the bottom of this J and tipping the curve up a little straighter. So I want to make sure that I've got my O kind of on these lines as well. So there's a little bit of trial and error here, but basically you're just trying to get a design sketched out that you like the way it looks, and also that will connect together so that you have a solid word when you're finished. So here I'm just going to trace in my Y and finish up my circles. When you get to tight quarters like this, it can get a little confusing as to how to group your coils. And in those cases, it's going to come in handy to have coils that are a little bit fatter and some that are a little skinnier. And that can help you to fill in some of the spaces where the coils don't fit exactly. Now I have an interesting dilemma here. I guess I'm going to need one more coil here. But we'll see what that looks like when I actually get to laying it out. It could be fun to have the Y come up as high as the J. Maybe I'm going to try that. just on the one side and make it a little more asymmetrical. Yeah, kind of like that. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and count my circles just to get an idea of how many of the large coils I need to make. All right, so for this design, it looks like I need about 108 large coils. And the other thing that you want to think about when you're sketching out your design is how the smaller coils are going to fit as well. Now, if you want to, you can go ahead like I did on this design and sketch out and count all the small coils as well. I've found on subsequent designs that it was faster just to estimate how many coils I was going to need and roll them as I needed them. And on this particular design, I can see that there's maybe a tight spot right here where I'm going to have to kind of squeeze in the coils, but for the most part, I should have plenty of space for the smaller coils in my design to fit inside and all the way around. So you can see I've got my finished template, and I've got, I think, at least 108 large coils here. A few of them have popped open, but that's not a problem. I can just re-roll them and retape them. And I'm ready to go ahead and start assembling the letters. So I want to take a large piece of parchment paper and lay it over the top of my template. And hopefully you can still kind of see the layout of the design. I'm going to go ahead and just start filling in all of my circles with the coils. And if you need to kind of flatten them out, you can kind of press the bottoms. You want them to stand fairly straight and to make contact with each other. So you want to keep them snug to each other. Now, they're not perfectly round, so in some cases they're not going to be perfectly touching. You can again kind of try to re-roll them and make them stand a little straighter. You can choose to use a different coil, and in some cases you are just going to have contact maybe in the middle of the coil and not right at the top. But you do want to keep them kind of snug together and be a little bit careful not to be pushing them out of the shape that you're creating. So I'm just going to continue on laying out my coils to fill in my entire word. I probably should have started from the bottom of the letters just to make sure that I was going to keep the bottom square so that my word will stand fairly straight when it's finished. But I'm going to go ahead and just see if everything fits in here. Hopefully I can square it off when I get there. So once you have all of your letters laid out, you're going to go back with your PVA glue. Now, if you have a squeeze bottle, it might work better than what I'm going to do, but I'm just going to carefully dab some Mod Podge onto the top of my design, trying to make sure that I'm getting glue in between all of the connections. You want to be really careful not to move your coils as you're doing this, so just take your time. And you can see that I'm just trying to get a little bit of glue in between all of the coils. My first layer of Mod Podge is dry now, so you can see that I can pick this up, and it's pretty wobbly, but it does hold together. So I'm just going to flip it over carefully, and it does have a tendency to come apart, which is fine. Don't worry about that too much. Just kind of put it all back together. And then I'm going to brush on another coat of the Mod Podge. And it should go quicker this time because I've already got my pieces together a little bit. And I'm just going to put a nice thick layer across the whole top of the surface. So now I'm going to let that dry, and then I'll go back with more glue around the inside edges so that I have all of the magazine paper covered and I have all of the joints glued together as well as I can. But I did want to show you that you can also build the letters individually and then put the word together. You don't necessarily have to build the word all at once. And especially if you're doing longer words, you might want to build the letters one at a time. But you do still need to think about how they're going to fit together. So this letter, I've gone ahead and I've put Mod Podge on the entire piece and allowed it to dry. And now I'm going to grab my L square here. And I'm going to start building my word. So you can also build your words one letter at a time, and once you have them laid out the way that you like them, you can go ahead and just use some sort of glue to attach your letters together. If you're building them a letter at a time, you might want to go ahead and use some E6000 glue or something a little stronger at your connection points. That way you can know that you've got everything secured with just a little bit of glue. So I'm going to switch to the small coils now, and I need a long piece of my crochet thread. And if you have a couple of big needles, you can use those. I'm going to actually make little needles out of my metal tape here. So I just need a small piece of tape. You could probably use regular tape too, but the metal tape is just really easy to mold and shape. So I'm just going to take this 2-inch piece and apply it to each end of my string. It doesn't have to look nice or anything. You're just trying to make the end of the string stiff enough to thread through the coils here. You want a pretty long piece to work with because you are going to need to tie on new strings, but you don't want it so long that it's going to get tangled. So I'm just going to take my first coil and slide it through one needle down to the middle. And then I'll take my opposite side and thread it through the other direction. And then I'm just going to carry on building a chain in that same fashion by threading the cord through and threading the other side through the opposite direction. And then when you need to, you can go ahead and just trim off that needle portion, tie on another length of your crochet thread, and you can add more tape and keep on threading. You want pieces long enough to go around, all the way around your word and fill in any of the inside edges. So it's up to you how long of a piece you want to work with. You are going to have to probably piece them together as you're working around the lettering, but so I like to have fairly long pieces, but they can get so long that they're a little hard to work with. So it's kind of your preference as to how long you want to make each of these strips. And you'll notice that 9 times out of 10, your knots are just going to end up getting pulled inside of the coils, so you don't even have to worry about them showing. If they do end up on an end, you can kind of adjust them if you need to, but most of the time they're just going to pull right inside of the coils and you'll never even see them. So I'm going to switch to a new word here because this has been glued all the way around and had time to dry, and you can see here where I've already placed some of my small round coils. So I have some nice long pieces of my small coils that are all woven together, and I'm just going to take my glue dots and start to place these all the way around the edge. And I'm just going to use the glue dots periodically to hold the coils in place. So it doesn't really matter where you start. There are going to be some places that are a little more tricky to work with, and some of it is just kind of squashing things and fitting them in place, or maybe you have to adjust things here and there, but I'm just going to put a glue dot right on the end there and slide it in the tip here. And then I'm just going to work my way around, and I'm just going to place, I don't want to use too many glue dots, I just need to hold the coils temporarily in place, and then I will go back with the Mod Podge again and glue them down. The great thing about these glue dots is you can kind of reshape them so they kind of fit the shape that you want them to. So now I just need to continue building a strip long enough to fill in this inside edge, and then I will go back with the Mod Podge again and just put it over the top to connect the pieces just like I did with the larger rolls. You can check out more upcycling projects in the links below, or visit the Upcycled Design Lab's website to search through hundreds of tutorials and sign up to join my email list. If you'd like to be part of my YouTube community, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you back here in the lab for my next upcycling experiment.